Tonight's class, Jews and Epidemics, will begin momentarily. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody's staying safe. But from the safety of our homes, we can talk about Jews and epidemics, the history of epidemics as it relates to the Jewish people. And as we'll see, there's been quite a bit, including the unfortunate cases where epidemics are blamed on the Jewish people. So if we went back in history, what would be the first example of a deadly epidemic in the Torah? Where does the Torah first discuss a deadly epidemic, a deadly plague? Well, plague was meant to hint at the 10 plagues that we'll be celebrating just next week at the Seder of Pesach, the 10 plagues that God brought before taking us out of Egypt, the final of which was Makat Bechorot, the plague of the firstborn. The death of the firstborn is the first deadly plague described on the Torah. Now, the fascinating thing is that at that first plague, God instructs the Jewish people to do exactly as we are doing now. Let's read it in the Torah. The Torah says, in the process of the Pesach, of the Passover sacrifice, on that first night, that we should bring the lamb home, and etc. Take a bunch of grass, dip it into the blood, put that on the lintel and on the mezuzot, on the side posts of the door, and you, you shall not go out. Ish mipetach beito ad boker. You shall not go out of your home until the morning. So on that night, when God killed the Egyptian firstborns, God says, stay home. There's a plague outside. Stay home. Don't go outside. Of course, that was a very different plague than what we are seeing right now. And of course, God was liberating the Jewish people from Egypt by the plague of the firstborn, Makat Bechorot. Nevertheless, it's uncanny, it's so interesting to see how exactly the same directive that we're all experiencing now, stay home, is actually what God says to the Jewish people at that very first plague, the very first deadly plague we know about in our history. Stay home, don't be outside during the plague. Now that was a prelude to the Exodus, to when the Jewish people were liberated from Egypt. Hopefully this time staying home is a prelude to the final exodus, to the coming of the Mashiach, maybe very soon. So that was the first plague, but of course that was a plague that we didn't impact the Jewish people. There were no Jewish victims. There's another very different plague, a very different epidemic soon after that in the Torah when the Jews are in the desert. And the Torah describes how the Jews had sinned and God brought a plague, an epidemic, and Aaron HaKohen, the high priest, Moshe's brother, stopped the plague with the Ktoret by bringing the incense, the offering of the Ktoret, which he actually did among the people, that stopped the plague. And this is because the Ktoret, offering the spices, the incense to God, is a greater korban, is a greater offering than the regular offerings of animal sacrifices. It's considered greater, more spiritual, more closer to God. In fact, the word korban, which usually means an animal sacrifice, is translated as kiruv, as getting closer, coming closer to God. Whereas the word for ketoret is drawn in the Aramaic from kesher, from connection, not only getting closer to God, but actually binding with God. So the Torah seems to be saying that when there's a plague, when there's an epidemic, we should try to get closer to God, and hopefully that will bring the blessing that we so desperately need. Something similar is expressed a little later in our history in the time of David HaMelech, of King David. Surely all of you have heard the expression, count your blessings. People say this all the time, count your blessings, be thankful for what you have. Well, King David wanted us to literally count our blessings and actually count them, because in his time there was a plague, a devastating plague that took many Jewish lives, and he was at a loss until he came up with the idea that each and every one of us should be making 100 blessings a day. Now, blessings means Baruch Atah, when we say Baruch Atah Hashem, Baruch Atah this, Baruch Atah that, like we do when we do a mitzvah, or when we have a meal, or during the prayer, we say Baruch Atah. That is a blessing. And making 100 blessings a day sounds like a tremendous amount, but actually between the various prayers and the meal times, etc., you mostly have those blessings already built in. So King David said, count your blessings, make sure to make 100 blessings a day, and that actually stopped the plague, which seems to indicate that blessings have this power. Now in Kabbalah, a blessing, when we say Baruch Atah, the word Baruch means to draw down. We translate Baruch as blessing, but actually in the original of the root of the word in Hebrew, Barech, Mavrich, it means to draw down, it means to bring something from higher to the lower. When we say Baruch Atah Hashem, when we bless God, we are drawing God's presence into this world. So if I have a glass of water and I say Baruch Atah Hashem, we say the full blessing, God created this glass of water, I am revealing God's presence before I actually drink that water. I am making God more felt and more expressed in this world. Bracha means to draw down, to bring it out into the open. King David wanted us to bring God's presence more into the open by making more blessings, and that stopped the plague. Or to put it in other words, when we're thankful, when we're grateful, when we bless God and reveal God in the blessings that we have, that's something that we can do to get rid of a plague, to get rid of an epidemic. Moving further in our history, more than 1,000 years, I would say, or close to that, after King David, we reach the Talmud. So we're talking 3rd and 4th century of the Common Era. And the Talmud discusses an infectious disease known as Ra'atan. Ra'atan, in the Talmudic terminology, was an infectious disease which was dangerous and they were afraid of. It's somewhat of a discussion. What is Ra'atan? What kind of disease is that actually? We could go on about that, but maybe another time. Whatever the disease is, it was contagious and it was dangerous. And the Talmud discusses various safeguards to avoid getting infected by Ra'atan, and some things that we might consider obvious today, but it was actually fascinating that they already knew it then. One particular rabbi in the Talmud warns of the insects. He says the insects, the flies that come from the direction of the patient who has the Ra'atan are infected. Of course, we know today that malaria and other such diseases can be spread by mosquitoes or perhaps other insects. So Ra'atan, watch out for the insects from that patient. The Talmud also says that a different rabbi would be careful not to sit in the direction where the wind would blow from the patient in that direction. So if the wind was blowing to the east, he would not sit east of the patient because that wind could carry the germs in his direction. Of course, something we know this going on right now with the particles that somebody might sneeze if they are infected. And another was wary just of being in the same room. Another rabbi in the Talmud says, don't be in the same room as a patient with Ra'atan, you can get infected. And another was even more careful, and he said, I wouldn't eat something cooked on that same block where the patient was. So again, things that we may seem more or less obvious today of the spread of germs, fascinatingly, we see that in 3rd, 4th, 5th century, the Talmudic rabbis were already onto that and were advising to take those safeguards from an infectious disease. Now, once we start to move further than Talmudic times and closer to our period of history, we get into a more bitter element in the discussion of Jews and epidemics. Because here's where we have a lot of anti-Semitism, something we'll discuss more tomorrow. In tomorrow's class, we discuss the oldest virus. Today we're dealing with the newest virus, but the oldest virus is actually anti-Semitism. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But tonight, in discussing Jews and epidemics, here's where we get a lot of anti-Semitism in the play. And when a plague, when an epidemic, when a new disease emerged, people would blame the Jews. This is tragic and something which was particularly infamous for the Black Plague. So in the Black Plague, or the Black Death in the 14th century, devastated the world, really. In some things I've read, about a third of humanity or a third of the Euro-Asian population was wiped out. It was terrible. And in much of Europe, particularly in the western side of Europe, where there were a lot of Jews at that time, Jews got the blame. Jews were accused of poisoning the wells or of otherwise spreading the disease, and this caused devastation. 500 or so Jewish communities spread throughout France and Germany, particularly in the Alsace, where France and Germany meet. We were some legendary Jewish communities for several hundred years. 500 Jewish communities were wiped out. In fact, this was a major factor in causing the Jews to migrate east. So we know from more recent history how most of European Jewry lived in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Ukraine, in Russia, etc. But actually, earlier than that, the Jews were more in Western Europe, in the times of Rashi, other famous rabbis of closer to a millennia ago. But these persecutions and these devastations actually pushed the Jews further east, where things were somewhat better. Now, obviously, blaming the Jews was caused by anti-Semitism. But there was also another factor, or another argument, and that was that Jews seemed to be impacted less. Less Jews were being infected and less Jews were dying. It seemed like it was some Jewish plot against everyone else because the Jews are getting off easy. Now, there's some discussion of what was really the cause. Why were the Jews better off during this epidemic than others? And one obvious factor is that Jews were separate. The Jews were segregated into the ghettos. They had to live in the ghetto and not among the people. And that was a benefit, in this case, to be separate from the people and not catch their plagues and not catch their diseases. Another thing we need to remember is that Jews practiced better hygiene. So we're talking, again, 14th century, 600-700 years ago. There's no running water. There's definitely no hot water. And washing your hands is a big deal. And a shower means a trip to the bathhouse. So people were not very good about these things. The Jewish people, however, have the mitzvah of netilat yadayim. We have to wash our hands before meals, as well as upon waking up in the morning, and various other times we are meant to wash our hands. That the halacha legislates. Any time really we touch something internal on ourselves or under our clothing, we're meant to wash our hands. Anytime we touch something that is considered unclean, we're meant to be washing our hands. These things are built into Jewish law. And then, of course, we have the mikveh and the bathing before Shabbos, which caused the Jews to be much more particular about hygiene than what was common at that time. And this seems to have also reduced the impact of the disease. So that's a fringe benefit, really, that these mitzvahs had, causing the Jewish people to be safer, to be healthier. And I call that a fringe benefit because it's something important for us to remember. The Torah's lifestyle is a good lifestyle. The Torah's lifestyle is something which is good for us and healthy for us. But that's not what it's all about. It's not why we do the mitzvah. We do the mitzvah because it's a mitzvah, because it's part of the Torah, because God said so, and fulfilling the mitzvah draws us closer to God, draws us closer to our neshama, to our soul inside of ourselves, and what and how we are truly meant to be. These health benefits or other benefits are a fringe benefit. In other words, the famous example would be kosher. People say kosher is healthier, and it's true. It's healthier to eat the healthier animals, the specific kosher ones. And of course, today we are all impacted because of people eating totally the wrong kind of animals, such as bats or other creatures. And of course, the Torah forbids not only for Jews, but also for non Jews, any live animals. We cannot tear limb from living flesh from a living animal. So, another problem with those wet markets. A less known health benefit in the kosher laws is that there's no blood. The blood must be drained and salted from the meat before the meat is cooked. So after the meat is slaughtered by the kosher, according to the kosher rules, the blood is not only washed off, but actually salted. The meat is salted to draw the blood out from inside. That makes the meat healthier as well as makes it last longer, which was another health benefit. It's also said that not mixing meat and milk is healthier. And we can go on about the health benefits that exist within eating kosher, and it's all true. However, that's not why we keep kosher. Again, we keep kosher because it's a mitzvah, because it's the divine design for how we should eat and how we should live. But when God gives us a mitzvah and God mandates and encourages us to do a certain thing, that is also going to be good for us. God wouldn't say, eat this and don't eat that if the permissible food wasn't also a positive, healthful, life-giving food. So, yes, it is healthier, and yes, it is better. And the same true for the washing of the hands and these other mitzvahs that involve hygiene. They're not there for the health benefit, but that health benefit comes along because when God tells us to do something, it's the full package of blessing the mitzvah itself and the goodness that comes with it. God wouldn't be encouraging us to do it if it wasn't actually good for us. Now, as we get closer to our time in history, we have two more outbreaks that can teach us quite a bit. One involves, and this should be probably 19th century, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger, this is in Hungary, and in that area, Bratislava or Czechoslovakia, one of the greatest rabbis of that time, until today known for his brilliant brief notes in the Talmud and difficult to answer questions that he poses. But at that time, there was a terrible outbreak and a terrible infectious disease. And he got very involved and he called for strict social distancing, no crowds, no gathering. And he had limited even the groups coming to pray in the synagogue to 15 people or less. And he had people come in shifts so there should be less people and less spread of disease. He even wrote that if people will not follow the rules, the community should hire the police as guards to lock the doors of the synagogue to not allow more than 15 people at a time. Ultimately, his efforts were successful in reducing the spread of the disease, and he actually got a citation for that for the local government. So everything that we're up to today with taking these measures and social distancing and staying home, he was advocating 200 years ago, and really is a lesson for us to take these things seriously and do our best. Another story that's insightful and important to know at this time is when there was an outbreak just several decades later in Lithuania and Vilnius, and what's known in the Jewish terms as Vilna, where there was a great Jewish community, and a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was giving the advice and guidance at that time, and he said that anybody who was at all weak or sick should be eating on Yom Kippur so that the plague, the epidemic, doesn't get them. So much so that he publicly ate on Yom Kippur in order to encourage all of those sickly and weak people that they should as well. And that caused some controversy because there were other rabbis who believed that it wasn't dangerous and they should not be eating. And this actually underscores an important message, Because the law is, the halacha is, that in the case of danger to life, we violate almost any mitzvah in the Torah. We would violate Shabbat and violate Yom Kippur, including eating on Yom Kippur, if there is a danger to life. But that's not because we value life more than the mitzvah. Our life and the mitzvah and the connection to God is one and the same. But God himself commands us. The mitzvah is, the Torah's guidance is that we should protect life over for actual fulfillment of the mitzvah at that time. The mitzvah becomes to eat on Yom Kippur. The mitzvah becomes, in that situation, if someone's life is at stake, to transgress the Shabbat, maybe to take him to the hospital or whatever needs to be done. We don't violate a mitzvah to save a life. The mitzvah now is to put the other mitzvah aside and save a life. So in other words, that is also a directive of God. That is also a directive of the Torah. We never violate the Torah. The Torah guides us in these situations. Rather than performing that mitzvah, we should be saving a life, and that's the mitzvah we should be doing. And this is why this rabbi felt that that was the way to do on that particular Yom Kippur, while others felt it didn't meet the threshold, which is important for us to remember. We shouldn't rush to say, well, someone is not well, let's violate the Shabbos. We should understand the rules involved, and where possible, of course, where it's not possible, in case of doubt, we do violate first and try to save a life, or even try to save a possible danger to life. But wherever possible, before the Shabbat or before Yom Kippur, we consult with a doctor and with a rabbi to know whether this is a situation that warrants violation in order to save a life, in order to protect the health. And finally, in conclusion, an incident from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. When Lubavitcher Rebbe was about 20 years old, so we're talking early 1920s, there was a terrible typhus outbreak in the southern Ukraine where he lived. And he got very involved with helping people and caring for the sick, so much so that he himself got sick, and he was carried a very high fever, as was common for the typhus patients. So much so that his mother, writing in her memoirs, describes how he was delirious and mumbling words of the Torah in his state of semi-consciousness from such a high fever, which that reminds us and that teaches us that we shouldn't get carried away with looking after ourselves, buying out the store shelves or whatever it is. In a case of epidemic or a virus, we should also be looking out for others. So yes, we need to look after ourselves and make sure we and our families are taken care of in such a situation, but it's easy sometimes to get carried away, each man to himself, and fight for your own well-being in such a circumstance. We have to remember that the mitzvah remains to look out for others and help others, following the example the Rebbe gives us. Well, let us hope that we don't need to discuss epidemics anymore, because the healing and blessing shall come, and all those who are already infected or even in danger should be healed miraculously if need be, and all of this should be history very soon and very quickly. Tomorrow, again, we discuss the oldest virus, and that means the discussion of anti-Semitism. What's behind it? Can we make sense of it? And really, is it getting any better? And again, as a reminder, the Seder in a box, which means your opportunity to order a full Seder from our caterer in Skokie, ready to go. All the parts of the Seder, including matzah and Haggadah, the mortar and the egg and everything prepared for the Seder plate, as well as multiple delicious kosher options for the Seder dinner, all ready to go, Seder in a box, so you don't have to shop around and hang around town during this epidemic. You'll be able to stay home and just order this, have it dropped up or pick it up in one pickup. The Seder in a box orders close tomorrow, Tuesday the 31st. So please do go on our website at chabadriverwoods.com/Seder, Seder, and order, so you'll have it ready, because we do need to submit the orders. So the orders will close tomorrow. Again, Seder in a box, your full Seder ready to go. chabadriverwoods.com/Seder. Please order by tomorrow. And again, we'll see you tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock, right here, same place, same time. Have a wonderful evening.